For our final session this afternoon, in discussion of aging, ethics, and healthcare, we're going to be talking about quality of life. I think that's very appropriate. We've had sessions on philosophical and ethical foundations, on the medical perspective, economic issues, and evidences of compassion. And I wish I had kept track this all through the day of how many times I've heard the phrase quality of life mentioned. It's something that comes up in all our discussions from whatever perspective we're talking about aging and health care. So I think it's very appropriate that we include this, and the timing is quite correct as well. For this session, we have 1 hour, and we will have a presentation of about 25 to 30 minutes and a response of 10 to 15 minutes, leaving a few minutes for questions from the floor. For our presentation, we're very pleased to have with us today Dr. Miriam Cotler, who is Associate Professor in Health Administration at Cal State Northridge and Director of the Health Science Center for Research and Community Service. She received her MS and her PhD from UCLA and has done research, writing, speaking, and service in the areas of aging, healthcare, and ethics. So it's very appropriate that she bring us a presentation on the quality of life for the elderly.
Thank you, Dr. Orr. I had planned to attend this conference, but not under these personal conditions. About 2 weeks ago, a woman that I am very proud to claim as a good friend asked me to prepare this talk in her stead because she was ill. She died last Sunday. I mention this for 2 reasons. Recognize Alice Froelich. Alice was an inspiration to those of us fortunate enough to know her as a friend, as a colleague, and as a teacher. Second, Alice and I talked about quality of life. One talked about many things with Alice. She was comfortable, she was open, never self-indulgent, empowering, and empowered. I wish that she were here to share her thoughts with you, but I am confident that she can be a role model. Thank you. As Dr. Orr has said, everyone this morning and this afternoon has talked about quality of life. I felt that some of you, particularly Jeannie, really demonstrated quality of life issues as well or better than a talk focused on it. My job, it seems to me, is to try to make the concept explicit. I will try not to, as Dr. Pellegrino outlined this morning, not to reduce it to politics or sociology or economics, but all of these are very much related. A discussion of quality of life could take just a few minutes, or it could take years of an ongoing dialogue. It's extremely complex. In the short time I've had to prepare to work on this talk, realized that a topic about which I thought I was very well informed has just begun to open up to me. I think we would agree that it's largely a self-perception, an evaluation of our own well-being. We could also agree on some of the major attributes, and the literature is consistent about at least the major attributes, such as satisfaction with your daily existence or attitude to oneself, including self-esteem and your environment. But it would be like most discussions of abstract concepts such as beauty or quality in general that end with no consensus. And it seems to me that what we're doing here these few days and in this endeavor is trying to find some common meanings if we can't, as a beginning to consensus, even if we can't get consensus in the first place. If we were to have this general discussion, we would walk away that the I know what I like is an acceptable rationale for a position with no accepted standards, but we would not have enriched the discussion. We would have no new insight. And we need to understand how to describe, provide, enhance, and begin to measure quality of life. It is common these days to associate the term quality of life with decisions made by individuals at the end of life, such as withdrawing and withholding medical care, as we've talked about today, and rationing, which are both the focus of this conference. However, and I want to stress this, quality of life is about living. Previous speakers have talked about the quality of dying. I want to begin the discussion with quality of living. And it is not exclusively about health care, although good health is one precondition to optimal well-being. There are limitations to the degree to which health care is associated with good health and with well-being. I would like us to expand the discussion. The concept of quality of life is very complex and multidimensional. It's an index of the goodness of a life, and it includes well-being of persons in the community who are not in need of services. The quality or richness is enhanced by factors which foster independence and mobility, increase function, and allow persons to exercise choices and to realize their given potential. It asks, what sets of conditions optimize well-being and value? What factors improve quality of life and which impede it? The concept includes those goods we would enhance for ourselves as a community and as a society. At the societal level, thinking of us as a community, we will all acknowledge that there are basic goods which pertain to a free society: justice, the environment, safeguards to our psychic and personal liberty, and minimum standards of food, shelter, education, and safety. We might each construct different lists, and we might rank differently. Our translation of these services, of these goods, into structures and services, into financing mechanisms and controls, is political as well as ethical. Public discussions explore what we want to enhance as a community. It's the way to develop a consensus on societal values, or at least understand what issues divide us. And that's especially important in this fragmented and pluralistic time. I wanted to say to Joe Auslander this morning, it seems to me the reason the lawyers are so involved is because we don't have consensus, and we do have a pluralistic society with respect to spiritual values. We must ask two questions, it seems to me. What are the minimum external conditions we will tolerate as citizens or provide under welfare? And secondly, what are the desirable externalities that clearly improve the condition of living for all of us? For example, the environment, including clean air and water, preservation of land for parks. May I point out that for the elderly, these social goods are very important. They are less free to change location. They have more leisure time to enjoy nature and use our public areas. A barrier-free environment, affordable access to public places, and transportation are just a few. The environmental issues are also important at the institutional and at the individual levels. Most elderly persons prefer to remain in their own homes, and about 75% are successful in doing so. Features which are adaptable, allow privacy, can be personalized, and which maximize space, comfort, and most important, safety, help the frail elderly to compensate for losses. At the institutional level, we explore quality of life as a management strategy for geriatric patients and to set institutional policy. 5% of persons over 65 years of age, about 1.5 million people, live in nursing homes, and 25% die there. We want to set policies that promote respect and individual autonomy. We're all aware of the deleterious effects of institutional living on the elderly, including loss of physical and cognitive function and accelerated frailty. But we now understand that this type of decline is not inevitable. Neither normal aging nor nursing home residence need be accompanied by these deficits. The components of quality of life, such as freedom to make choices, respect, recreational activities, are strongly, positively associated with continuing high mental and physical function among the elderly. And we now have data showing restoration of high levels of physical activity among persons in their 80s and 90s who had been impaired. There's an extensive literature on improved perception of quality of life among this population who have control over day-to-day decisions and personal choices. The Institute of Medicine formally recognized the importance of quality of life concerns to nursing residents and as a major factor in quality of care. They recommended changes in nursing home licensing and certification, conditions of participation, and the IOM suggested some standards that include: 1, residents should have a supportive, comfortable, home-like environment. 2, nursing home residents should have choice over their surroundings, schedules, health care, and activities. 3, residents should be treated with dignity and respect. 4, residents should have opportunities to interact with members of the community inside and outside the nursing home. The IOM deliberations were influenced by a Washington-based National Coalition on Nursing Home Reform, which had held a very interesting series of 15 meetings around the nation, along with a convention. They brought nursing home residents to a hotel in Florida, and they modified one floor of the hotel so that the nursing home residents could stay there. And they were asked to discuss and rank. There were 455 discussants from 100 homes, asked to discuss and rank the issues they felt most important in quality of life and quality of care. And their perceptions reaffirmed the interrelationships between the two. They cited qualifications, competence, attitudes, and feelings of staff, and interaction among staff and residents first. Some examples were how helpful, friendly, and cheerful staff are, and how much they treat a resident as a person worthy of dignity and respect. The freedom to make choices was very important. Some of the choices they listed were flexible visiting hours, freedom to decorate their rooms, choice of a roommate. Rosalie Kane has a similar list, including residents' ability to have personal possessions in their rooms, their perceptions of staff attitudes toward them, dignity afforded, and opportunities for choice in recreational and cultural events and meals. These are the kinds of daily choices that most of us take for granted. I recently interviewed residents of Joe Auslander's nursing home on a durable power of attorney project, and unrelated to the study, just in chatting about their conditions of living, several people commented about choices like, could I get them a calendar? And how important it is to be able to get the daily news. One woman said she really liked Walter Cronkite because he speaks so clearly, and she can hang in with him. This is important in the acute care setting as well. Policies such as withdrawing and withholding treatment, advanced directives, and even facility design include quality of life considerations. Particularly since the Cruzan decision, there's an increasing awareness of the importance of providing persons admitted to hospitals and nursing homes with an advanced directive, like the DPA. I would suggest that primary care physicians begin the dialogue in their offices. According to the IOM, and I'm quoting, "For the very sick and disabled, the quality of the care and the way it is provided are probably the most significant contributors to well-being," end quote. As I think you would all expect, societal and institutional quality of life issues are better understood and more predictable than at the level of the individual. We want to analyze factors of importance among the healthy as well as sick to appreciate their values and choices, but also we want to be able to target programs and maximize their welfare. The models that attempt to analyze individual quality of life are similar, but the labels differ somewhat. They include physical, social, and emotional function, attitudes to illness and life circumstance, wealth, a social support system, and assessment and satisfaction with one's life situation. Note that satisfaction is only one piece of quality of life. The items within the categories vary with the culture, and they change over time. The rankings of the items also change, and they can be stated negatively or positively. Speaking of culture, a Chinese student tells me that they define quality of life, a good quality of life, as containing the ability to eat, sleep, and play mahjong. My response is, I hope they'll let me pick my own game. There are subjective and objective components to individual quality of life. Responses appear to vary by gender, age, and situation, although the research itself is not consistent with respect to age. I believe younger persons associate quality of life with lifestyle. And as we become older or middle-aged, we are more aware of illness and loss. As we become old and at an increased risk for diminished capacity, ability to function assumes greater relative importance. The objective or external dimensions of quality of life for the individual are directly observable and obviously easier to evaluate. They're preconditions to or enablers of the good life, such as adequate food, shelter, access to education and health care. And the personal qualities we can observe and measure, such as freedom from disease, pain, and severe disability, including limitations to function. The subjective or internal components are highly personal. They reflect our total life experience, the extent to which each of us not only sees life as worth living now, but has done so throughout our lives. So they're not only moderated by personal history and personality, but also coping style, self-esteem, and the spiritual dimension. They are expressed through behavior, satisfaction, and stated attitude. It varies with pain and suffering. The perception changes dynamically and fluctuates both positively and negatively. For persons with special impairments, we can target programs to make life as meaningful as possible, despite the impairment. There is evidence, for example, that the quality of life is measured by sociability, affect, cognitive or physical function significantly improves when specific programs such as hearing aids or other assistive devices are targeted. The research findings with respect to individual treatment decisions are inconsistent and confused. On the one hand, we're concerned with perceptions and choices by persons whose quality of life we perceive to be diminished and who seek or demand continued care. We're also concerned with persons who refuse life-saving or extending treatment, which we feel indicated, where the caregiver feels that the benefit-burden ratio is clearly in favor of treatment. We have mixed feelings about stories like my friend's father, who, in excellent, vigorous health on the occasion of his 90th birthday, advised his son to feed your mind more than your body, exercise every day, and at all costs avoid doctors and hospitals. In his 93rd year, he broke his hip, and they couldn't wire it successfully. He consulted with his children, stopped eating, and died 10 days later. What is our social obligation? To enhance conditions for a decent minimum quality of life for the individual, particularly in this economic climate with the push to ration. Quality of life has been used, well, by myself among others, as an argument against age-based rationing. What's the justification for that claim? If we no longer accept that what a person perceives it to be is a sufficient description of quality of life, then we begin to question the relative value of a life and its very meaning. Is any kind of life better than none? How about a surgical procedure with little probability of success, followed by a painful post-operative period, followed by suffering, followed by death? It would seem that there are basic minimum conditions below which life is not worth living, but we have to ask by whose perception. Persons have experienced life as sacred and precious under objective conditions which might have seemed unbearable to them at another time or to those of us who were looking on. Since it is so complex and variable, why attempt to measure? Why not just ask the patient what she wants and go from there? Well, information regarding the degree to which quality of life affects treatment decisions, as I said, is very limited. The attributes are poorly understood, and many report that the concept is of little analytic value. There doesn't seem to be a significant relationship between persons' crucial healthcare decisions and their quality of life score. Literature shows low correlation between quality of life measures and the decision to enter an intensive care unit, That is consistent with the prior studies that show no significant relationship between perceived poor quality of life and agreement to continue chronic care. In a JAMA editorial comment on the ICU study, Nancy Zweibel offered an alternative explanation. The study of quality of life on the intensive care unit had used a global measure of quality of life, such as satisfaction with physical, emotional, and communal features. She points out in the editorial that the factors patients consider when making decisions regarding life-extending care may be more concrete, like the presence and level of chronic pain, the prognosis, the ability for self-care, mobility, degree of cognitive acuity, and perceived burden on the family. Sylvia Sherwood et al. Attempted to measure quality of life for terminal cancer patients using several measures. Their primary finding is that there is not a gradual decline over several months. Rather, there is a sudden decline in quality of life as they measured it when death is imminent. There is a strong interaction between quality of life measures and previous physical and psychological distress, maintenance of physical and mental function, and a support network. They also caution, however, that changes in quality of life are not entirely consistent. Pain is an important and a separate measure, and about 20% of the patients couldn't be classified in a group where quality of life was worse even in the last week of their life. They recommend use of a number of different measures in terminal cancer patients. Since quality of life doesn't appear to be an indicator of hope or the wish to live, except possibly among persons at the very end of life, why not just state some general postulates and try to get consensus, such as, 1, there are objective components which carry social obligations. Society has an obligation to maintain decent minimum conditions which enhance the opportunity for quality of life. 2, these conditions are necessary but not sufficient to provide that an individual will experience higher quality in his or her life. 3, when persons are ill, the healthcare system addresses quality of life by maximizing quality of care and respecting the person.